All right, understanding that there are times to thank God for a conclusion, even when it's not necessarily the conclusion that everyone would want. Let's call this chapter No More. Understanding that in this chapter, God is going to say that there are no more opportunities for two people, Tyre and Sidon, but three people within those two nations. And that no more is going to mark the end of the misery of Israel, having to always be apprehensive about the neighbors around them who are giving them less than a hospitable environment to just make a living. When they're actually trying to just do what's right. Understanding that is not always an assumption in Israel or Judah's history. So when they get their things together, God is talking about a time when he prepares for them a place where they can just live in peace. As the beginning of the chapter starts out with a prophecy against the prince of Tyre, going from the first verse through the 10th verse, picking up at verse 11 with a lament over the king of Tyre, going from verse 10 through 19, finishing up with a prophecy against Sidon, a much shorter prophecy that transitions into what we mentioned, that no more will there be a briar to prick or a thorn to hurt them among all their neighbors who have treated them with contempt. Talking about Israel. However, breaking the chapter down a little bit further, verses 1 through 10, in prophesying against or giving a word against the prince of Tyre, is going to seem to focus on the way that that prince has an inflated sense of self, as we mentioned in the last chapter. If you are an individual who has never had struggle with ego or had a struggle with ego issues, hats off to you or salute you. But we talked about, I think recently, that I think if we are all serious, we can talk about a time when the image we had of ourselves was probably a lot greater than what we actually were. And laments like this or passages like this give us a chance to see why it is so important to nip that in, as they say, the proverbial bud. Because here it is going to say around verse 2, because your heart is proud and you have said, I am a god. I sit in the seat of the gods, in the heart of the seas. Yet you are but a man and no God, though you make your heart like the heart of a god. He's going to go on, therefore, to talk about, actually, first of all, the things that they actually did have that might justify the confidence. Verse 3, indeed, wiser than Daniel, no secret hidden from them. By their wisdom, they have turned that into profit. Verse 5, going on to say that they have increased their wealth through the profit. Understand that there are times in life when we can make money, but we don't necessarily have the wisdom to stack it. They seem to have both. However, it went to their head. Therefore, in verse 6 is going to say, because you have made your heart like the heart of a god. Therefore, as we see in a lot of God's prophecies, after he has laid out the facts justifying what he's going to do, he hits a therefore statement. Once again, that's what he's going to do here. Therefore, behold, I will bring foreigners upon you, as that is going to be a theme that carries forward through verse 10, as he asks them, you shall die the death of the uncircumcised by the hand of foreigners, for I have spoken, declares the Lord. Raising the proverbial question I actually missed in verse 9, will you still say, I am a god in the presence of those who kill you? A harsh condemnation. But it is one, as we have seen before, that flips the scripts, as we sometimes say, or as it is sometimes said, on their overconfidence. And it basically takes those who were beneath them, the foreigners, and makes them the lords over their destruction. And I guess one way of paraphrasing it, I would say. However, the lament over the king of Tyre is going to seem to be a little bit different in that God himself is not going to talk about their inflated sense of self. He's going to talk about all the reasons that they legitimately have for glory. Starting in verse 12, you were the signet of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. As we have said before, it's one thing if we say it about ourselves. It's another thing if God says it about us. And as opposed to the prince of Tyre, who had an inflated sense of self, God is just starting out with the compliments of what they actually were. Were being the operative phrase, as he will go on to not only talk about their beauty and their wisdom. I think he already mentioned wisdom. What? Yeah, wisdom and beauty. Let's talk about their role. Verse 14, you were an anointed guardian cherub. God himself placed them, meaning he didn't necessarily seek his own glory. God placed him in a glorious position. Verse 15, saying that he was also blameless in his ways from the day he was created until. That is kind of the tragic statement. Unrighteousness was found in you, setting off a series of charges and therefores that are kind of in a individual charge, therefore individual charge, therefore pattern, as opposed to kind of the bulk charge and then the response God would give in the initial condemnation or the condemnation of the prince of Tyre. The king of Tyre is going to get a sequence or an item by item condemnation. Enough words. Verse 16, in the abundance of your trade, you were filled with violence in your midst and you sinned. So I cast you as a profane thing from the mountain of God. Skipping forward to verse 17, your heart was proud because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom for the sake of your splendor. It's not literally going to say therefore, but it will say, I cast you to the ground and exposed you before kings to feast their eyes on you. Verse 18, then saying, by the multitude of your iniquities and the unrighteousness of your trade, you profaned your sanctuary. The therefore statement that's literally, so I brought fire out from your midst and it consumed you. The abundance of their iniquities kind of being the theme here, reminding us of the way in which God says he chastens those he loves. And so if God allows us to go too far down a road of independence in the wrong thing, we can accumulate sometimes a greater weight of judgment. And that seems to be the tragedy of the king of Tyre, or the condemnation given toward the king of Tyre. It's the multitude, it's the abundance of the wrongs that he did that got him the greater weight of condemnation. Skipping on though to the prophecy against Sidon in verses 20 through roughly the end of the chapter, really maybe through 23. It's going to basically generally simply say that Sidon is going to be condemned once again in that famous way that God has of saying, I am against you, when God turns against the people that he might have shown favor toward previously. And that's flat out going to be it. There's not going to be a lot of explanation other than the one that leads into our title for this chapter. It's simply going to seem to implicate or imply that Sidon might have been one of those bad neighbors, leading to verse 24, as we mentioned before. And for the house of Israel, there shall be no more a briar to prick or a thorn to hurt them among all their neighbors who have treated them with contempt. A concept that is going to be repeated in the last verse of the chapter, verse 26, where toward the end it's going to say, they shall dwell securely when I execute judgments on all their neighbors who have treated them with contempt. Then they will know that I am the Lord God, reminding me that it is not only through punishment that God makes a statement about who he is, understanding that God is not simply vindictive, or he's not vindictive at all. His vengeance has a purpose. Sometimes it is to alleviate the accumulated anger of simply having to sit in silence while wrong has been taking place. But at other times, it is to create peace for those who cannot get peace when those around them refuse to give them mercy or justice or other relief they probably deserve. In this instance, we see that God's violence or his vengeance against the nation creates a level of peace that his people might not otherwise enjoy, which is why we sometimes say, my prayer for you is my prayer for me. God willing, we get off of the path that deprives people of the peace that they deserve, even if they have done wrong, understanding that Israel was not innocent in this circumstance. There is, as we have seen before, a such thing as too far. As we have seen God deal with Egypt and Assyria and Babylon for going too far in the use of their authority, we are seeing that judgment stretch to kingdoms like Tyre and Sidon. Tyre, as we mentioned before, once a nation that, as opposed to all those nations that had oppressed Israel, had once been an ally of Israel who did not persist in their righteousness. And now, in order to bring his people peace, he is talking about a day when there will be no more of those who insist on bringing them drama. Reminding me even more that God is not partial, and as an impartial judge, even to his people today, his New Testament believers, the Apostle Paul reminds us, if possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Understanding that the way we live can motivate God to either come back and defend the peace for us, or, if he has to, defend the peace from us.